$1. The entire auction crowd burst into laughter as the weak, dirty horse stood trembling in the corner, ribs showing, head hanging low, completely broken. "No one wants that useless animal," someone shouted. "Send it to the slaughterhouse." But then, a quiet old cowboy stepped forward, pulled a $1 bill from his pocket, and bought the rejected horse nobody wanted. People mocked him instantly. "You just wasted your last dollar, old man." But the cowboy didn't say a word, because when he looked into that horse's eyes, he saw something nobody else could see: pain, fear, and a secret that was about to change both of their lives forever. What happened next left the entire town in tears. And before this unbelievable story continues, make sure you subscribe right now, because stories like this remind us that even the most broken souls deserve a second chance. Also, comment below and tell us, if you were standing at that auction, would you have bought the horse for just $1? Don't forget to hit the like button if this story touched your heart. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in hope again, and press the bell icon so you never miss our next emotional story. The dusty auction yard buzzed with cruel laughter as people crowded around the final horse of the day. The animal stood alone behind the wooden fence, its thin body trembling under layers of dirt and old scars. Its ribs showed clearly beneath its dull brown coat, and one of its legs shook every time it tried to move. Flies circled around small untreated wounds near its neck while the horse kept its head low, almost as if it had already given up on life. Children pointed and laughed. Ranchers whispered insults. Some men covered their noses as though the poor creature carried disease. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his forehead and forced a fake smile. "All right, folks," he shouted loudly, trying to sound confident. "Strong ranch horse. Who'll start the bidding at $100? Silence. Not a single hand rose in the crowd. The horse barely reacted. Its tired eyes stared at the ground while the crowd exchanged amused looks. One rancher laughed loudly and shouted, "That bag of bones ain't worth horse food." The crowd erupted with laughter. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. "All right then, $50? Still nothing." A woman shook her head. "That horse looks one step away from dying." Another man smirked. "You'd lose money just keeping it alive." The auctioneer's smile slowly faded as embarrassment spread across his face. He lowered the price again and again, but nobody wanted the broken animal. $20, $10, $5. Nothing. The horse suddenly stumbled slightly, struggling to stay standing, and more laughter exploded across the dusty yard. "Just send it to the slaughterhouse already. Poor thing's useless." Then finally, frustrated and desperate to finish the auctioneer sighed heavily and shouted, "Fine. $1. Does anybody want this horse for $1? For a moment, the crowd went quiet. Then an old cowboy slowly stepped forward from the back of the crowd. His boots were worn out. His hat was faded from years under the sun. Deep lines covered his tired face, and his old coat looked almost as broken as the horse itself. He reached into his pocket carefully and pulled out a single crumpled dollar bill. "I'll take him," the cowboy said softly. The crowd burst into laughter again. "You just wasted your last dollar, old man. That horse will be dead by morning." But the cowboy ignored every insult. He slowly walked toward the trembling horse and gently placed his rough hand against its neck. The horse flinched at first, then became strangely calm. And in that quiet moment, the cowboy noticed something hidden deep inside the animal's exhausted eyes. Not weakness, not fear. Something powerful, waiting to be awakened. The old cowboy slowly led the weak horse away from the noisy auction yard as the sun began setting behind the hills. The crowd still laughed at him while he walked through town, but he never turned around. The horse limped beside him carefully, its head hanging low with exhaustion. Dust rose beneath their feet as they traveled down a long dirt road toward the edge of town where the cowboy lived alone. His ranch was small, old, and nearly falling apart. Broken fence posts leaned sideways in the wind. Parts of the barn roof had collapsed years ago, and dry weeds covered most of the empty land. The house itself looked tired and forgotten, just like the man living inside it. As the cowboy opened the rusty gate, the horse hesitated nervously, unsure whether this strange new place was safe. The cowboy gently removed the rope from the horse's neck. "Easy now," he whispered softly. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here." The horse remained still. That night, the cowboy filled an old bucket with water and placed fresh hay inside the barn. But the horse refused to eat. It stood silently in the corner, shaking slightly whenever the cowboy moved closer. Years of fear and mistreatment had taught the animal not to trust humans. The cowboy sighed quietly and sat down nearby on an overturned wooden crate. "I know what that feels like," he muttered. As rain slowly began tapping against the barn roof, the cowboy stared into the darkness. Old memories returned to him like ghosts he could never escape. Years earlier, sickness had taken his wife and young son during a brutal winter storm. After losing his family, the cowboy lost almost everything else too. His ranch failed. His friends disappeared. The town slowly forgot about him. People stopped seeing him as a man. They saw him as a failure. That was why the horse mattered to him. For the first time in years, he looked at another living creature and saw the same pain he carried inside himself. Late that night, the cowboy noticed blood near the horse's injured leg. Without forcing the animal, he slowly approached with warm water and old bandages. The horse became frightened at first, stepping backward nervously, but the cowboy spoke in a calm voice the entire time. "It's all right, boy," he whispered. "I ain't here to break you." Carefully, he cleaned the wounds one by one. The horse watched him closely, confused by the kindness. Nobody had treated him gently before. Over the next several days, a quiet bond slowly began forming between them. Each morning, the cowboy brought food and sat beside the horse while talking softly about life, loss, and second chances. Sometimes he shared stories about his son. Other times he simply sat in silence so the horse wouldn't feel alone. The town, however, continued mocking him. Whenever the cowboy rode into town for supplies, people laughed behind his back. "How's that dying horse doing? You planning its funeral yet?" But the cowboy ignored every insult. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky orange, the horse carefully walked toward him for the first time and gently pressed its head against his shoulder. The cowboy smiled with tears in his tired eyes. "Spirit," he whispered softly. "That's what I'll call you." Because somehow, despite everything life had done to him, the horse still had spirit left inside. Weeks slowly passed, and little by little, Spirit began changing before the cowboy's eyes. His wounds started healing. The dullness in his coat disappeared, replaced by a healthy shine beneath the sunlight. The horse no longer stood weakly in the corner of the barn. Every morning, he walked outside with more strength, breathing in the fresh air as if finally remembering what freedom felt like. The cowboy watched carefully, surprised by how quickly Spirit learned things. The horse understood simple commands almost immediately. He opened gates with his nose, followed the cowboy without ropes, and somehow always seemed to know what the old man was feeling. On difficult days, when painful memories returned and the cowboy sat silently outside his house, Spirit would quietly walk over and stand beside him without making a sound. It was as though the horse understood loneliness. One afternoon, while repairing a broken fence, the cowboy accidentally found an old metal whistle buried inside a toolbox. Rust covered most of it, but he remembered using it years ago to train ranch horses. Curious, he lifted the whistle to his lips and blew a short, sharp sound across the field. The reaction shocked him instantly. Spirit's ears shot upward. The horse froze completely for 1 second, then suddenly sprinted across the ranch with incredible speed. Dust exploded behind him as he raced through the open land faster than the cowboy had ever imagined possible. The old man stared in disbelief while Spirit leaped over fallen fences effortlessly before circling back toward him like a trained professional racing horse. The cowboy's heart pounded. "That ain't normal," he whispered. The next morning, the cowboy rode into town and visited an elderly rancher named Walter, one of the oldest horse breeders in the county. Walter had spent his entire life around champion horses, and people respected his knowledge more than anyone else's. When the cowboy described Spirit's behavior, Walter became strangely serious. "Bring the horse to me," the old rancher said quietly. Later that afternoon, Walter carefully examined Spirit under the sunlight. He checked the horse's posture, muscles, legs, and eyes before suddenly growing pale. Then he slowly pulled back part of Spirit's mane and revealed a faded marking burned lightly into the horse's skin. The cowboy frowned. "What is it?" Walter looked up with disbelief. "Years ago," he said softly, "there was a racing horse called Midnight Thunder. Fastest horse I ever saw. Won every major race across 3 states. He paused carefully. Then one night, the horse vanished. The cowboy's eyes widened slightly as old memories returned. He remembered hearing stories about the famous stolen horse years ago. Ranchers everywhere searched for it, but nobody ever discovered what happened. Walter pointed toward Spirit carefully. "That marking," he whispered. "Only champion bloodlines carried it." The cowboy stared at Spirit differently now. Suddenly, everything made sense. The intelligence, the speed, the fire hidden inside those tired eyes from the auction. Spirit wasn't ordinary. Training began the very next morning. At sunrise, the cowboy started exercising Spirit across open fields and dusty trails. At first, they moved slowly, rebuilding the horse's strength carefully. But day after day, Spirit improved at an unbelievable pace. He ran faster, jumped higher, and responded to commands almost perfectly. The cowboy felt alive again for the first time in years. And their bond grew stronger with every ride. Sometimes the cowboy laughed like a young man again while racing Spirit across the hills during sunset. Other times he spoke quietly to the horse about his lost family, his regrets, and the emptiness he carried for so long. Spirit always listened silently. Word about the mysterious horse spread quickly through town. Soon, people gathered near fences just to watch Spirit run. The same townspeople who once mocked the horse now stood speechless as dust exploded behind him like a storm. Some couldn't believe this powerful animal was the same dying creature from the auction. Then one afternoon, a wealthy ranch owner named Calvin Briggs arrived at the cowboy's ranch in an expensive carriage. "I'll give you $5,000 for the horse," Briggs said confidently. The cowboy looked at Spirit standing peacefully nearby. Then he shook his head. "He ain't for sale." Briggs smirked. "That's more money than you've seen in years." The cowboy gently placed his hand on Spirit's neck. "You can buy horses," he said quietly, "but you can't buy family." The regional championship race arrived under a blazing summer sun, and the entire town gathered around the enormous dirt track outside the county fairgrounds. Flags waved in the wind while wealthy ranch owners prepared their finest horses near the starting line. Spectators filled the wooden stands with excitement, cheering loudly as riders warmed up across the field. But the loudest reactions came when the old cowboy appeared with Spirit. Whispers instantly spread through the crowd. "That's the auction horse. No way that bag of bones belongs here. He'll collapse before the race even starts." Some people laughed openly while others simply shook their heads. Compared to the polished racing horses standing proudly beside rich owners, Spirit still looked different. Though healthier now, scars remained visible across parts of his body, reminders of the cruelty he once survived. The cowboy ignored the insults and calmly adjusted Spirit's saddle. "You don't gotta prove nothing to them," he whispered softly to the horse. "Just run free." Nearby, wealthy ranch owner Calvin Briggs watched with narrowed eyes. Ever since the cowboy refused to sell Spirit, bitterness had grown inside him. Briggs hated losing, especially to poor people. He had spent years buying the fastest horses money could find, and the idea of a broken auction horse humiliating him filled him with rage. The night before the race, Briggs secretly ordered one of his workers to sabotage Spirit. Under darkness, the man slipped quietly into the old cowboy's stable and scattered sharp metal pieces near the horse's stall. Early the next morning, Spirit accidentally stepped on one while moving around the barn. The horse cried out in pain. The cowboy rushed over instantly and discovered blood dripping onto the wooden floor. His face turned pale as he carefully examined Spirit's injured hoof. "No," he whispered in shock. For a moment, everything seemed ruined. The cowboy sat silently beside Spirit for hours, believing the race was over before it even began. Outside the barn, heavy rain began falling across the ranch while thunder echoed through the hills. Spirit rested his head gently against the cowboy's shoulder. Tears slowly filled the old man's eyes. "You saved me," he whispered emotionally. "When the whole world laughed at both of us, you gave me something to believe in again." The cowboy carefully cleaned the wound and wrapped the injured hoof as best he could. Deep inside, he knew Spirit was still hurting. Racing could make the injury worse. maybe even permanent. By sunrise, the cowboy made his decision. They would race anyway. Not for money, not for fame, but to prove that broken souls still deserved a chance. When they arrived at the track later that day, dark storm clouds still covered the sky. Mud covered parts of the racing field, making conditions dangerous even for healthy horses. The announcer's voice thundered across the arena. "Riders to the starting line!" The crowd roared with excitement. Spirit stepped nervously into position beside massive champion horses worth thousands of dollars. Some riders smirked at the old cowboy while others pitted him. Then the starting gun exploded. The horses launched forward like lightning. At first, Spirit struggled badly. His injured hoof slowed him down, and within seconds several horses pushed far ahead. The crowd expected exactly this outcome. People began laughing again while commentators ignored the cowboy entirely. But the cowboy leaned forward and spoke quietly into Spirit's ear. "Don't run from pain," he whispered. "Run through it." Something changed instantly. Spirit's ears lifted. His muscles tightened. Then suddenly, the horse exploded forward. Mud flew violently behind him as he accelerated across the track with terrifying speed. One by one, Spirit began overtaking horses that had mocked him moments earlier. The crowd slowly fell silent in disbelief. The cowboy held tightly as wind screamed past them. By the final turn, only Briggs' prized black stallion remained ahead. Briggs smiled confidently from the lead position, believing victory still belonged to him. Then Spirit charged. The horse pushed harder than ever before, ignoring pain, fear, and exhaustion. Every painful step carried years of rejection, suffering, and survival behind it. The crowd rose to their feet screaming as Spirit closed the distance rapidly. And in the final seconds, Spirit surged ahead. The finish line exploded into chaos. The entire arena fell silent for one shocked heartbeat. Then people erupted. Cheers thundered across the racetrack as the impossible became reality. The broken horse nobody wanted had defeated the greatest racing horses in the county. The cowboy climbed down slowly, overwhelmed with emotion, while Spirit breathed heavily beside him. But then Walter, the elderly rancher, stepped forward holding old documents in trembling hands. "I knew it," he said emotionally. The crowd gathered around as Walter revealed the truth. Years ago, Briggs himself had secretly stolen Midnight Thunder after losing a fortune gambling against the legendary horse. To hide evidence, he abandoned the horse's injured bloodline animals in distant auctions and remote towns. Spirit was one of them. The son of a legend. Gasps spread across the crowd as Briggs' face turned pale with fear. Sheriff deputies immediately moved toward him while angry spectators shouted in outrage. Briggs tried denying everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. The cowboy barely listened. Instead, he stood beside Spirit with tears running down his face. People surrounded them cheering loudly, but the old man only placed both hands gently against the horse's face. "You were never worthless," he whispered. Spirit lowered his head softly beside him. And as the sunset finally broke through the storm clouds above the racetrack, many people in the crowd wiped tears from their eyes. Because they realized something powerful that day. Sometimes the world throws away the most beautiful souls simply because it cannot see their true worth yet. The championship arena shook with noise as thousands of people packed into the massive fairgrounds for the biggest horse race of the year. Bright banners waved above the crowded stands while wealthy ranch owners proudly showed off their strongest horses near the starting gates. Reporters moved through the crowd collecting stories, and gamblers shouted predictions while placing bets on their favorite racers. But nobody placed money on Spirit. As soon as the old cowboy arrived with the once-rejected horse, whispers spread through the arena like wildfire. "That's the dollar horse. The animal from the auction. No way he belongs here." Some people laughed openly while others stared in confusion. Months earlier, Spirit had looked half dead inside a filthy auction pen. Now the horse stood taller, stronger, and healthier than ever before. His coat shined beneath the sunlight, and his eyes burned with quiet determination. Still, many people refused to believe a horse bought for $1 could compete against elite champions worth fortunes. The cowboy gently patted Spirit's neck. "You don't owe anybody proof," he whispered softly. "Just be yourself." Nearby stood Calvin Briggs, the richest ranch owner in the county. Beside him waited his prized racing stallion, Black Titan, a horse famous for crushing competitors across the region. Briggs watched Spirit carefully with cold eyes filled with jealousy and anger. Ever since the cowboy refused to sell Spirit, Briggs became obsessed with destroying him. Earlier that morning, Walter, the elderly rancher who studied Spirit's bloodline, finally uncovered the truth hidden for years. Spirit was no ordinary horse. Walter discovered old breeding records connecting Spirit directly to Midnight Thunder, the legendary racehorse that disappeared mysteriously years ago after winning nearly every major competition in the western states. Ranchers once called Midnight Thunder the fastest horse alive. Then one night, the horse vanished without explanation. But Walter uncovered something even darker. Midnight Thunder had not disappeared naturally. The horse had been stolen. And every clue pointed toward Calvin Briggs. Walter quietly shared the information with the cowboy before the race began. "You need to be careful," Walter warned. "A man who hides secrets that long will do anything to protect them." The cowboy looked toward Briggs standing near the track. Suddenly, everything made sense. The hatred, the pressure to buy Spirit, the fear hidden behind Briggs' confident smile. Spirit carried the bloodline Briggs tried to erase forever. Minutes before the race started, disaster nearly struck. As race officials prepared the horses near the gates, one of Briggs' workers secretly loosened part of Spirit's saddle straps, hoping the cowboy would fall during the race. But Spirit sensed something wrong instantly. The horse refused to move and stomped nervously until the cowboy noticed the damaged equipment. The cowboy stared across the field toward Briggs. Briggs simply smiled. That was the moment the cowboy understood. This race was no longer just about winning. It was about truth. The announcer's booming voice echoed across the arena. "Riders to the gates." The crowd erupted with excitement. The cowboy climbed onto Spirit carefully while storm clouds gathered overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance as cold wind swept across the racetrack. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost as if the world itself waited for something unforgettable to happen. The starting gun fired. The horses exploded forward. Mud flew violently beneath pounding hooves as racers battled for position around the massive dirt track. Black Titan immediately charged into the lead while Spirit stayed near the back during the opening stretch. Spectators laughed again. "The dollar horse is finished." But the cowboy remained calm. He leaned close to Spirit's ear. "Not yet, partner." As the race continued, rain suddenly poured from the dark sky, turning the track slippery and dangerous. Several horses struggled to maintain balance. Riders shouted desperately while mud blinded their vision. But Spirit moved differently. Gracefully, powerfully, almost as though he belonged inside the storm. One by one, Spirit began overtaking the other horses. The crowd slowly fell silent as the rejected horse surged forward with unbelievable speed. Reporters rushed toward the fences, trying to capture the impossible moment unfolding before their eyes. By the final lap, only Black Titan remained ahead. Briggs smiled confidently from the lead, believing victory was still guaranteed. Then Spirit unleashed everything. The horse accelerated like lightning across the muddy track, his muscles driving harder with every stride. The cowboy held tightly as roaring wind filled his ears. The crowd rose to their feet screaming. Black Titan fought desperately to stay ahead, but Spirit refused to stop. Every painful memory, every insult, every moment of rejection pushed him forward. And just before the finish line, Spirit passed Black Titan. The arena exploded. Thousands of people screamed in total shock as the horse bought for $1 crossed the finish line first. The cowboy immediately climbed down and wrapped both arms around Spirit's neck emotionally while cameras flashed everywhere around them. But the celebration ended suddenly when Walter stepped onto the track holding old legal documents. "I have proof," he shouted loudly. The entire arena quieted. Walter revealed evidence connecting Briggs to the theft of Midnight Thunder years earlier. Witness records, hidden payments, and stolen breeding contracts exposed the truth Briggs buried for decades. People gasped in disbelief. Sheriff deputies quickly surrounded Briggs while angry voices erupted across the arena. Briggs tried denying everything, but fear filled his face as the evidence mounted against him. Meanwhile, the cowboy remained beside Spirit quietly. Tears rolled down the old man's face as he looked into the horse's eyes. "You were never worthless," he whispered softly. Spirit gently lowered his head against the cowboy's chest. Around them, many people in the crowd began crying too. Because deep down, they understood this story was never truly about racing. It was about second chances, about pain, about broken souls the world throws away too quickly. And as the storm clouds finally cleared above the arena, golden sunlight shined down across the cowboy and his horse while thousands watched in silence. The horse bought for $1 had become worth more than gold. Not because of money, but because he reminded everyone that love, loyalty, and belief can turn even the most rejected soul into something legendary.